Okay, well, hello and welcome to this New Testament journey. Absolutely fantastic to have you with us. Some of you might have been with us before, but for many of you, this will be the first time that you're engaging with the New Testament journey, and we want to welcome you so much. It's brilliant to have you with us. My name's Andy, and I'm here with Tom.
Yeah, and we're part of Croydon Vineyard Church, and our great desire, is to see you have your life transformed by this book, which it's probably a book that so many of us know is present in life. It's something that maybe sits on a shelf or an app on a phone. But our great hunger, we've seen over and over again, haven't we? When it becomes something that goes from being the Bible to my Bible, from being something that I ought to read to something that I find, this feeding me. It unlocks so much in people's lives, doesn't it? It truly is that sort of the breath of God upon words that sort of feed and go to work within our souls and our bodies and our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing, isn't it? And you might be coming at this from all kinds of different places. Maybe you're against faith. You've come to prove us wrong. Which should be fun.
You're so welcome.
You're brilliant to have you. More than likely, you've got a bit of spiritual hunger, and maybe some Bible reading is something that you've tried to get into before, but it's been a bit of a hard work, bit of a struggle, and maybe you feel like you've never quite got there. Maybe this is just one more year where you've encountered Jesus again and again. But wherever you're at on the journey, you're so welcome to join with us on this part of it.
And let's just paint two pictures for you. You know, in the sort of the Old Testament wisdom tradition, as it were. There's the one picture which is this. It's of yourself. Imagine yourself in 12 months' time, and you feel like you've got kind of a knot in your neck, and there's this sense of anxiety that's clinging and clawing away at you, and you struggle to sleep like you wish you could. And there's sort of this sense that there's a bit of resentment or a bit of I don't know how to put words even to it, but there's something about you like, I just feel like I'm not doing what I always wanted to be doing with my life. And biblical language, Old Testament language, Psalms would be like, you're like a tree that's not by a stream. It's a sense of wilderness. There's a sense of, I try and reach for something and I can't grab it.
Yeah.
That's one vision of yourself. And then the other vision of yourself is one that maybe, and we have people like this in our church, people who've come into this country as immigrants, circumstantially poor. Maybe they don't own their own home. Maybe they're even in temporary accommodation. Maybe they're devoid of a family network who look after them. Maybe you are somebody who you haven't got the job that you wanted to have. Or you haven't found that relatives and everybody that you've prayed for has done well. And yet there's this throbbing, pulsing life that's going on within you. This what the Bible would call joy and peace. There's something of the kingdom that's kind of within you. And as you sit there in 12 months' time, you can look and think, well, you know, on lots of levels, people would look at my life and say it's not to be aspired to, but oh my word, like I can see God using me. I can see blessing flowing from me to unexpected people and to people I'm intentionally spending time with. And our yearning and our hope and our intent and our vision for this is that you find yourself in 12 months' time in that latter vision of yourself. You're like a tree that's planted by a stream that continually flows. You're like somebody who's got like a spring of living water welling up within you. And it's almost like this source of life and well-being and joy and peace and righteousness in the Holy Spirit, which is not of your own making, but it's within you. That's what we're shooting for. And that's what Jesus says the Word gives you. And that's what we've found the Word has given us. When you read it, you love it, you understand it, you work hard to grapple with tricky passages. It's not just, a verse to feed me today. It's something that forms you and changes really your outlook on everything, your understanding of yourself, understanding of who God is. Ultimately, it's where you meet the living God. If that happens, we're high five. That's our goal. That's our yearning for you. So we hope and we truly pray that you'll get on board with this.
Absolutely. Now, there are loads of Bible reading plans out there, loads of good ones, probably better ones than what we've got, but we've found that this works for us. And as we'll say again and again through the journey, it's not really so much about getting us getting through the New Testament, ticking boxes day by day. What it's about is, exactly as Tom's been saying, it's about getting the New Testament through us.
Yeah.
And not even just as individuals, but as a people, as a church, it's getting the New Testament through us. So shall we get cracking?
Well, let's jump in, because this is what the New Testament itself does, isn't it? It doesn't have a huge long introduction.
Correct.
It just jumps straight in.
Yeah.
So Luke chapter 1 to 5. Quite long chapters in Luke.
Yep.
And if you've read all 5 chapters in one sitting, which you might have done, or one each day, as you might have done, or maybe you haven't read them and you just want to flick through as we're talking, quite a lot of content.
Yep.
So some key themes we want to help you see for the sake of you being able to place yourself in this big story and see, this part is this big thing that God's always said he's going to do and has now done in Jesus and is continuing to do in his church.
So the first theme we're going to look at is the idea of salvation as rescue from enemies. And I'm going to jump right into the text. We're going to read a little bit from Luke chapter 1. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favour with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." Jumping forward, Mary begins to sing. "He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but has sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, just as he promised our ancestors."
There's so much in this. There's just so much. But the key thing we're trying to put out here is that what Mary believes Gabriel has promised her is all about her son. And, if you're new to the New Testament, the first thing maybe we should have had as our pre-theme is it's all about Jesus. Right? Jesus is the axis upon which all of history shifts. And he is the one that redefines and fulfills everything that the Old Testament has brought. But the key thing that he does, the promise of God that Mary says, my little baby is going to fulfill, is he's going to free us from our enemies. Which is really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So already this is quite surprising.
Yeah.
To me, as I read this evening, I was like, this is slightly surprising. Mary's key thing, my baby's going to grow up, he's going to become a king, and he's going to pull down rulers who've been oppressing us, he's going to push away the rich who've been kind of abusing their power, and he's instead going to liberate us, oppressed, poor people, humble in the land. We're going to be lifted up by him as our king. So isn't that just amazing? That this, which was written probably in the late first century, taps into this real thing that we're looking at in our society at the moment, which is abuse of power and use of power and a yearning for justice.
Yeah.
And this is what Jesus is bringing, according to the Gospel of Luke.
Yeah, it's amazing. We'll see this again and again, this kind of what we might come to and feel like is an ancient and dusty document is suddenly more relevant than you ever could have possibly imagined. There's an interesting interplay. We'll look, because Zechariah sings about these themes as well, but just as maybe a slight tangent, this idea of, Luke is writing about history, isn't he? He's writing about things that people he spoke to saw and heard. Almost certainly he went and spoke to Mary, or at least those around Mary. It's fascinating. I don't know if you caught there's a podcast, very famous, hundreds of millions of downloads, The Rest is History. A couple of skeptical historians, Tom Holland being one of them, who we've read a little bit, and they had episodes at the end of last year talking about Jesus' history. And it was fascinating that even from quite a skeptical historian's standpoint, they had to conclude the evidence for Jesus, for the reaction to Jesus, his crucifixion, and the fact that something blew up. This is history, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's so much. Again, there's so much. What all we're doing here is trying to throw out little breadcrumbs for you to follow. And many of you will have followed these already, and you will know more than we do. And what we're hoping to spark hunger and interest. And something that you mentioned there just made me think, isn't it? I love the way the Gospels, when you get to understand them a bit more, you realise, okay, so Luke's Gospel has some stuff that Matthew and Mark don't have. And as you say, that's probably because Luke spoke a lot to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so what you get is you get things from her perspective a lot more, whereas in Matthew and Mark and John, you don't get those bits. Now, Mark was probably written based on Peter's perspective. So it's so focused on what he saw. Now, he's not in the story at the birth of Jesus. So anyway, that's just little flavours, and it just adds to the richness of our understanding. So this is the mother's version of what happened.
Yeah, amazing. Now, the question we're kind of confronted is, angels? I mean, was she like a deluded, uneducated peasant? I mean, this question of history, which Luke clearly lays it out as, doesn't he? And yet, almost immediately, we're confronted with these things that are probably outside of our experience in terms of the miraculous. Just in case anybody's kind of put off and thinking, "Oh, it's talking nonsense, aren't you?" How can we keep walking this journey, or how can we? I don't know if we can answer that question or come at it.
So, I mean, and this pulls into really a key theme of Luke's Gospel, which is this, there is what Jesus brings, and what we have to do, if we're going to take Jesus seriously, is that he brings an invasion into what's the seen, let's call it the seen realm. So the world that we see and interact with has Herod as a king who's evil, has Romans invading the land who are oppressing people, has material poverty, and has all these kind of seen things. And Jesus's gospel that he brings starts with a revelation that behind everything that you see are these powers that are grappling and fighting. And one power is Satan. And Satan is behind the Herods, and is behind the oppression, is behind the sickness, is behind the illness. And God, the Almighty, the Most High in Luke's language and Gabriel's language, is now invading the world. And the first thing he does is to reveal that the true enemies that you face are not your neighbour, are not your government, are not the circumstances you're in. The true enemy that you face is the one called Satan. Now, what Jesus does is actually astonishing, because if you read through the Old Testament, as many of you will have done, you'll realise the name Satan barely appears. It's almost never seen that the real problem we have is a spiritual problem. The real problem that the Old Testament looked at was the material, the seen problem. And then in comes Jesus, and he's like, let me open a whole new window so you really understand the big problem you have in your life, according to Jesus, is a spiritual problem. It's that this power that is called Satan is fighting over you. And so what you get in the start of Luke's Gospel is the first thing that Jesus does is be filled with the Spirit in his adult ministry. And then the first thing he does as the representative of God is to go out into the wilderness to go mano a mano against Satan. Now, this is so full of the history of David versus Goliath. Jesus is called the Son of David, the Son of David, the Son of David. He's going to free people from their enemies. All that language, you've got all of that. Who is the enemy he goes out to go head to head with? Is it Herod? Is it Roman? Is it, Caesar? It's not. Who is the Goliath who stands shouting over the people, who's saying, like, I'm going to be your king. You have to fear me and live in fear. It's Satan. And Jesus goes out into the wilderness like David with a little sling, and the sling that he uses is the word of God, and he defeats Satan in the wilderness. And that is just so crucial to understand who Jesus is. And after he's defeated him, he comes out and says, the kingdom of God is upon you. I'm here to raise the dead. Let me quote it. It's the Nazareth Manifesto, chapter 4. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. He's quoting Isaiah chapter 61, I think. And in that, what he's basically saying is the primary issue, the primary battleground in your life is the spiritual realm.
And I thinking about that phrase about him being the light of salvation. There is a sense, particularly in these chapters, I think we'll see it all the way through. It's like the light's being switched on, and this idea of these are my enemies, and this is my problem, and this is my fight, and this is what I need, and it's kind of a scrabbling around in the dark, and then Jesus comes in light, and it's like, oh, there's more here going on than what I thought before this light was switched on.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a bigger picture, and I think that's a big thing that the New Testament does as we walk this journey, isn't it? It enables us to see things that we've not seen before.
That's such a great way of putting it. And an analogy might be that you're looking at the computer and you're like, why is this? And you're looking at all the different things and what this isn't working properly. Why is it not working? I could try this, could try that. And eventually you discover that actually you open up the case, and inside there's a whole lot of stuff that as a newbie into the world of tech, you didn't even realise was in there. You just thought that was a box. And then you're like, oh my goodness, oh, look at all these wires and look at this. And it's almost like Jesus comes and he lifts that up and he says to you, the real issue you have in your life is that you need to be liberated from the influence and foul leadership and corrupting work of Satan over you, which is deep inside. You need to be liberated from that by him. And so let him be the one who instead puts his spirit in you and works from deep within inside. So it's an inside out view of salvation, not an outside in.
So it's not about overthrowing the Romans in this way. It's about overthrowing a spiritual power that has gripped me right within my heart.
And this comes back to, what we said at the start. We'll meet people over and over again, won't we? And you look at their circumstances and, and they're miserable, they're down. They're depressed or they're discouraged and they're feeling low. And you look and think, if your grandparents saw the life that you're living, all the technology, all the food, all the sort of comfort that you had, they would say you should be the happiest person on the planet. They just look and be like, every dream that I, as a grandparent, at your age, have had, you're now living, but you're not content. And it's like a revelation, because the circumstances in which you live, you can adjust and modify. And if you're lucky, you'll land them in what's considered to be the perfect way of living. But ultimately, the big problem you have will not have been solved. And you can have others who have the circumstances, they're poor. I think of Dilish in our church, struggling, fighting financially, kind of relational network, or family network overseas. And yet every time you meet the man, it's like there's just stuff that flows out of him, love and joy and and that's what's been done. The thing inside of him has been renewed. It's like streams of living water coming up.
Yeah.
The light's been switched on.
Yeah. Jesus talks about this in some of the verses that we read. This is part of what we're trying to get at, isn't it? Jesus answered him, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." So as Jesus walked the earth and navigated amongst people, one of his big things was the sickness/sin factor, isn't it? It's this internal liberation which everybody needs, and that's what he came to call people to.
And I think it's just worth us at this point really hitting hard on that theme, because what I find is that many of us we come to Christianity as something that we need to live up to.
Okay.
So we come and think, oh, Jesus says I need to love my neighbour. Jesus says I need to love God. I need to read the New Testament. I need to... And it's like what we do is we come at this thing thinking, oh my goodness, I was already stressed. I already was trying to earn enough money to get through. I was already trying to kind of be kind to my neighbours. I was already trying to, if you're a parent, like raise my kids well and be a good person. And now on top of all of that, I've now got to live up to this standard of moral perfection that Jesus seems to ask me to live. And it's like, oh man, like it almost feels like he's adding a burden to my life. And that is such a strong theme in many who've grown up in let's say a relatively success-driven culture. It's about my achievements. I need to make my own identity. I need to prove myself. I need to do well. And if you may have picked that up from parents or from schooling or whatever, this sense that if I fail, then that's the worst thing that can happen. And what Jesus comes and says, I'm looking for people who know they're going to fail. I'm looking for people who know they can't live up to this. I'm looking for people who look at themselves and say, do you know what? I'm struggling. I'm sick. I need a doctor.
Yeah.
And the doctor I need is not a doctor who's going to just change my circumstances. There's actually something in me that I can't do this.
Yeah.
And that is the gospel of grace, that when you get to that point, Jesus says, okay, yeah, that's true. Why don't you let me take the burden? Why don't you put on me the desire you have? Why don't you allow me to gift you the salvation that you need, that you don't need to work it up yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, if we drill down on like a really specific outworking of that, which maybe we're all involved in, I mean, we could look at this kind of New Testament journey Bible reading plan as we've alluded to, as something we need to do in order to achieve, or a way of study so that we might pass a test. And actually, it's a hopefully day in, day out, it's going to be a lot more like, do you know what, I'm sick, I'm going to lie down on an operating table and ask the doctor to go to work on me. It's, I've got to walk this life. This is food and nourishment that will propel me along the path rather than prep me for a test I'm probably going to fail. Is that kind of, just to bring it real down to one way that we think about?
For sure. You know, there will be a day, maybe in a week, maybe in a month, maybe in several months, where you'll wake up and you think, I've not read the Bible. I've not done the chapter I'm meant to do. And in that moment, you must realise, in no way does that remotely affect how God feels about you. He's for you. His grace and his mercy are rising upon you. His joy is over you, as much on that day as it was on the day when you read and you really felt so much like this is a gospel of grace. The invasion of Jesus is an invasion of his kingdom, that he stands over you and he declares favour. And that's irrespective of your performance. So you could never read the Bible. You could just fail every single day, and Jesus' favour and his love will still be standing over you to say, I could never love you more. I just couldn't love you any more than I do right now. I couldn't. And at the same time as that it's food. So you could feel love, and it's like, but my life is still, I'm still all over the place. Like, hear the love of Jesus, receive the love of Jesus. And part of the love that he offers you is to say, now, take this wisdom, take this instruction, take this guidance. This is how to live well. This is what it looks like to be somebody who thrives and survives and does well.
Yeah. So we looked at this theme of being kind of liberated from the enemy. The enemy that is Satan. That is that malevolent spiritual power. Are we then just? I don't think we are we? We're not just left in neutral. Like kingless.
So again, so this light that you described it as light, isn't it? Revelation. So the spiritual power that is against you is summed up in the name Satan. Evil, darkness. And actually, if you ask God to open your eyes to it, you'll start to see it everywhere. Little lies you believe, discouragement that you feel. At night, I find at night, and reading about this seems to be the case for so many people throughout history, I just have dreams that feel oppressive. And I can't even tell you exactly what I dreamt, but I wake up and there's this sense that there's this force that's working against you to dehumanize you, to discourage you. And And Jesus says that's Satan. That is the power of the enemy, of evil. But he doesn't leave you neutral. He says, I've come to baptize you in the Spirit. This force, this power, this personality, actually, part of God himself, we struggle to find language for him, who comes as a dove on Jesus. And Jesus says, I've come that you would be filled with a whole, powerful, spiritual reality of God himself, that actually when Satan and the Spirit go to battle, it's like Satan just runs off. Yeah. He's got no hope. No hope. That the force and the power and the presence of God that's present in his Spirit, it's just incomparable.
Yeah.
It's incomparable with anything that evil can bring at you. And so the primary desire for Jesus is that you would be baptized by the Spirit. Now, don't get into all sort of, depending on your background, you might be, oh my goodness, that means I have to do this. No. It doesn't mean you have to do anything. What it means is you allow the Spirit, the presence of God, to immerse you. Baptism means immersion. Like you're drenched with the presence of God, that he breathes on you.
Yeah. And so there's this sense in these chapters of Luke, which is extraordinary, in that it's not just portraying this exceptional God who came and walked among us. It's kind of calling us to follow him, to be like him, to experience some of the things that he experienced, to do some of the things that he did. I think we've spoken about it before, but this almost this idea, the way that Luke presents it, is like Jesus as new humanity, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a new way of it's trans. Yeah. I mean, you can say one version of being a human and a different way of being a human, and the way that is the way of humanity in Mary, in Zechariah, is one that looks at itself and is like, I don't want to go on living like this. Like, this isn't what I thought following you, God, was like. I thought you promised us that you were going to help us live in a way that felt rich and full of joy. That's a way that being human, Jesus comes, yeah, right. That's totally right. That feeling you've got, that's totally right. That's totally of the Lord. And I've come to meet that. And I meet it by my Spirit and by my presence. Come follow me.
Yeah.
And if you do that, the change, it doesn't happen instantly, but you look back and think, oh my goodness, I've become like a new person. And John's language, born again. Jesus' language is kingdom transfer.
Yeah. Just reading a little bit in your devotional, which is available, some of the chapters this week, there's as well as Jesus being kind of new humanity, there's this really interesting thing that Luke does in terms of what happened to Jesus then happens to the church, and about that calling to us. Could you say a little bit more about that?
So, yeah, I mean, the great thing about this is that it's a very sophisticated piece of literature.
Yeah.
And one of the things we're hoping to do with this journey concept is to take us out of, I read a chapter and that I just read Luke chapter 2. Oh, I've read Luke chapter 2. And to actually enable that chapter to be placed in the big sweep of the big chapter. And Luke wrote his gospel and he wrote the book of Acts as a 2-part series. Now, he didn't write it with chapters, but at chapter 2 in our version, which is about a certain way through, Jesus, we see, has been in the temple courts, and he has prophecies made, and the Spirit falls on him, and he lives as a whole new kind of reality. The dove comes, and he lives a whole new reality, and then he actually goes into the wilderness, is attacked, oppressed, and he passes through that, and then he goes off to do his ministry. And you see in Acts chapter 2, there's been prophecies said over the church. They've been in the temple courts, and the Spirit of God falls on them, not like a dove this time, but like tongues of fire and mighty wind, breath, wind, same as actually the breath of God, the wind of the presence of God that falls on Jesus. Then there's a time of testing, Ananias and Sapphira, and persecution by the Jewish leaders, and then they go and do ministry. And so what he's showing is that what Jesus did, by his Spirit now the church does. And that's part of the journey.